And I think YouTube is going. So I think we are live, and we are like 4 minutes closer to being live on time this week, which is progress.
Do you see YouTube? Because I don't see YouTube.
I see YouTube.
Okay. All right. As long as you see YouTube, I'm happy with that. I definitely see Periscope and Facebook, so we got that covered.
Okay, perfect. So we are live. Welcome everybody to the Gunner Technology Livestream, a weekly 10-minute tech talk for non-techies and techies alike. This is week 2 of our 4-part JavaScript series. So I guess just to, and also if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, post on Periscope, Facebook, or YouTube, and we'll try and get to them.
Yeah, and subscribe on YouTube, because we now have a goal of getting to 100 subscribers, so we get a fancy URL to go.
Yeah, smash that subscribe button, everybody. So let's just let's do a quick recap of week 1, and I guess Cody, just jump in if I missed anything here or get anything wrong. So week 1, we talked about the very early days of JavaScript, the very beginnings of JavaScript. So the mid-90s, the internet's really taking off. This guy named Brendan Eich, who worked for Netscape, which Netscape Navigator was one of the very first browsers along with Internet Explorer. Brendan Eich created this language originally called Mocha, but then renamed JavaScript when Sun Microsystems' Java language really took off. And as Cody described it, you basically have, and I forgot to start my timer. Look, we're going to get so good at this by the end of 2017. It is just going to make people's heads spin.
Well, we did say that 2017 was going to be like, we're really starting in full 2018. 2017, the last month is just trying to get ramped up for 2018. So
this is like summer league ball. We're getting ready for the season. Then it's renamed JavaScript. And as Cody described it, basically, you have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And if you think about it as a house, HTML is the structure of your house. CSS is the look and feel of your house, like these beautiful yellow walls I have in my kitchen in Las Vegas. And JavaScript is the functional component of your house. So just a random example. How about now? Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, there we go.
Okay, cool. So we're officially live, right?
Yeah, we're still still streaming on Facebook, still streaming. I think Periscope started another live stream, and I still don't have YouTube, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure. Oh yeah, we are live on YouTube. So yes.
All right, technical difficulties for third week in a row. My computer died with about 98% of its battery life left. So
we suck a lot of power out of the room. It's.
I think that was YouTube trying to shut us down because this episode was going way too well.
No, so how Disney bought YouTube and they shut it down.
Yeah, that's right.
They have it back up now.
I'd work for Disney again. So how far did I get before I cut off? Did I get to the drawer analogy?
You were at the JavaScript is the func.
Okay, so JavaScript's a functional component, and the bad analogy I thought of is how smoothly your drawers close in your kitchen, whether it has that little stop motion or that they just slam shut. So that's how JavaScript fits into everything. I'm just gonna restart this timer. Let's go for another 10 minutes. We'll make this a long episode.
We've got a lot of hot air in us.
We got way too much. So that's the beginnings of JavaScript in the mid 90s. And then what happens is Internet Explorer has their own somewhat slightly different version of JavaScript called JScript. And so Netscape Navigator and Internet Explorer developing the two JavaScripts in tandem for the last 5 years of the decade, basically. And around 2000, stuff is starting. They're trying to standardize a bunch of stuff with JavaScript, but it's hard to sort of get everyone in line. And Navigator's sort of slowing down a little bit. They eventually open source development, and Netscape Navigator sort of morphs into what we now call Mozilla Firefox. And Internet Explorer is still going. They're like version 5, 5.5, version 6, which is like the really killer Internet Explorer version. But what we end up with at the end of the 90s, sort of the early 2000s, is this hot mess of wildly different JavaScript implementations on each browser. So it's really difficult for developers to write one piece of JavaScript once and be assured that it's going to work everywhere. You got to write a lot of nitty-gritty hacks to deal with all the different versions of Netscape Navigator, all the different versions of Internet Explorer. So that leads directly into part 2 of our 4-part JavaScript series here. And the question to you, Cody, is what did the JavaScript community do at this point to standardize the cross-browser or the cross-browser version implementations?
Yeah, so again, to use another analogy, imagine that you're refining fuel, you're making gasoline, and you're doing a pretty damn good job of making gasoline. Your gasoline is pretty damn efficient, and you're sitting here in Florida, and you're putting this gasoline in your Ford, and you're driving, and man, that truck is running really well on that gasoline. That engine is because the fuel is injected in the engine, and that truck is running really smoothly. So you ship your gasoline, and you're like, man, I have the world's best gasoline. This is awesome. But you start getting reports that are like basically, oh, my car broke down when I put your gasoline in it. My engine blew up when I put your gasoline in it. And that's a really good analogy, because what these things are called that are running this JavaScript that developers are writing, they're called engines. So you had different engines at the time. Microsoft had their own engine, Safari had their own engine, and then Mozilla had their own engine. Then you had a couple smaller browsers like Opera, which had their own engines. And
at this point, as far as specifications go, I think there was a version of ECMA script, which I think is the European Computer Manufacturing Association or something along those lines, that basically wanted to standardize how JavaScript worked across the board. So how seriously did the different browsers take that, and how closely did they align with those standardizations?
Right. And at first that was largely just taken as a recommendation that was ignored as each browser felt like they could do it best. Very much in line with the gasoline example. There's a standard formula that if you're going to refine gasoline, it has to follow. It has to meet certain standards so it doesn't keep blowing up engines. Well, eventually these engines that the browsers were writing, which we fed the JavaScript into, they started to comply to that. But in the early days, they were like, yeah, thanks, that's nice. And really it was Mozilla Firefox that was the only one that was actually following that standard. And that's really because they were the ones championing it. And
there was a component too to the fact that IE6 was such a killer browser. I mean, the market share IE6 had for the longest time was sort of put them in the position of, you know, make it worth our while to support these standards, right?
Right, exactly. And again, back to our last conversation, a lot of that was part of that IE6 was leaps and bounds better. The engine inside, which I think it was called Trident, the Trident engine inside of IE6 was so much better than the other JavaScript engines at the time, combined with the fact that Microsoft really was the dominant leader in the market in terms of desktop computers, and they were shipping with IE6 pre-installed on it. Right, so you really couldn't fight Microsoft. Microsoft basically said, that's nice that you have standards, but we're going to do it our own way. And what are you going to do, kind of thing.
Right. So then I guess what was or I was going to say, what was the straw that broke the camel's back, but what was, I guess, what was the first step towards fixing that issue of cross-browser implementation issues?
Yeah, and so this is where we get away from the gasoline example, because gasoline is static once it's refined. You can't say, oh, if this is a Ford engine, it's going into do this. If this is a Honda engine, it's going into do that. You can't do that with JavaScript. You kind of can. It's dynamic. So basically, for our intent and purposes, there was 4 different types of engines in the early days. And when you wrote JavaScript, in a lot of cases, you would have to write JavaScript and break up your code for all 4 different engines. So you'd have this really nasty code where it would be like, if the engine is Trident and the version of Trident is 6 or greater, do this right here. If it's Mozilla, which was called the Gecko engine, if it's Gecko, and it's greater than, the version is greater than 6, do this. If this is a WebKit engine, which was Safari's engine at the time, do this other thing. And I don't even remember what Opera's engine, what they used back then, but then you'd have kind of 4 engines. So you'd actually have to like quadruple your efforts in a lot of implementations, because you'd have to take into account which engine your fuel was running in, kind of thing.
Which is a huge pain in the butt. So it seems like the logical solution would be, if you're writing the same if this stuff all over the place constantly across all the different sites that you're working on, it seems like the obvious solution would be to, what's up, Fireball? That's Cody's giant dog. The obvious solution would be to somehow package that up so that you've never had to write that code again and standardize it across all the browsers.
Right, and that's where we started getting to the framework wars. The framework solved a big problem, and that was that quadruple of coding. So they kind of obscured all of that logic to determine what engine you were running in. And they were basically like, look, if you follow our instructions for using our framework, you won't have to worry about what browser this is running in. If you basically tell the browser to move this headline 3 pixels to the right, it will move 3 pixels to the right, no matter what browser you're doing it in. And that was the big nexus. That was the first promise of JavaScript frameworks, which they soon thereafter exploded from there.
So let's focus on one JavaScript framework in particular, the one that sort of really took off and still today is widely used. Just take me through the beginnings of jQuery and what jQuery accomplished for JavaScript developers.
Yeah, so it was interesting because, again, if memory serves me right, I was working at ESPN during the framework wars, and there was 4 that were kind of taken very seriously and were up for consideration, especially for us at ESPN choosing a framework to use. There was the Prototype Scriptaculous library, there was the Dojo library, there was MooTools, and then there was jQuery. And kind of jQuery was the last to the game. And when you're trying to decide what framework to pick, you're looking at a number of things. You're looking at, the feature set of the framework, what features does it provide, the community, meaning how many other developers are out there using that framework. So if you need help, you can ping them, and the documentation, meaning how well is the framework documented, so you're not kind of guessing on how to use it. Based on those 3, we initially went with Prototype and Scriptaculous, which the syntax at the beginning was very, very similar to jQuery. However, jQuery sort of ruling the day for a number of reasons. The combination of the size of the framework, which is initially very small, the minimalistic feature set of the library or the framework, meaning it was very easy. It was very simple to learn. The extendability, meaning it had a very good plugin architecture so the framework itself was very simple, but you had a number of additions you could add into the library that kind of would let you do anything and everything in between. And then the biggest thing is I think the main reason was the syntax. It was so nice to be able to kind of chain functions together. So kind of to use non-technical terms, if you're writing in like Scriptaculous at the time and you wanted to do several things to like text on a page, you would be like, make text bigger, then move text to the left, make text disappear, show text again. And this would be like a big block of code. With jQuery's chainability, you could basically chain that all together in one statement. And so if you wanted to add any more functionality to manipulating the text, instead of going back in and opening up and putting another line and adding that code in there, you just chained it to the end of that. So it was kind of just like a very easy to understand framework, and which I think then made it overtake Scriptaculous in terms of the community size, and then as well as the community grew, the documentation grew as well.
I think there was one other aspect too of jQuery that, at least for me, made it nicer to work with. And this is another topic for today because it sort of leads into next week too. But the way that jQuery worked with AJAX always seemed nicer than the way the other frameworks did. So I guess, can you just give a brief, or as brief as you can, overview of AJAX and how jQuery worked with AJAX?
Sure. So when someone loads a web page, basically what you're doing is downloading data, and so there's certain constraints there. You don't want to have too much data on a page because then it'll never freaking load. So you want to be quick. You also, so in terms of, take Gmail for example, you can't load. Let's say you have a billion messages in your inbox, which we kind of do. Right. But you don't want to load all of those messages at one time because the browser would take forever to actually render your mail messages. So when you're in Gmail and you're scrolling down, you notice that more messages come in and more messages come in and more messages come in. What that is AJAX, which is the JavaScript, without you knowing it, is going back to the remote server and fetching more messages and putting them at the bottom. Now you don't notice that because it's just happening in the background. The alternative to that would be every time you want to load more mail messages, you hit next to paginate through the more mail messages. So you are reloading the entire page. You're losing the mail messages that have already been loaded just to load the next 20 or so. So AJAX was that way to do things in the background. Again, to piggyback on our example from last week, submitting a form. When you submit a form without AJAX, you're just taking this one piece of the web page and you're sending that data. But without AJAX, you have to refresh the whole page in order for the form to be submitted. With AJAX, you just hit submit. This one part of the page gets submitted, and then you see a thank you message, all without ever having to reload that page.
So I guess that's a good place to stop for this week. That's sort of taken us to, let's say, like the mid 2000s.
Yeah,
somewhere around there at this point.
Yeah, definitely 2006 for sure, I would say.
And I think at that point is when a little something called Node works its way into the mix. So I think next week is going to be an episode about Node. So tune in next Thursday, hopefully at 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific, for part 3 of our 4-part JavaScript series. Check us out on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Periscope. You can listen to the podcast if you missed the episode. It'll be a heck of a podcast because there's going to be about 8 minutes of silence when my computer died. So that'll be exciting. You can just silently meditate.
I was going to say meditate on that. Side note, I wanted to get this because we had a comment on our blog post this week. What is Brandon Ike doing now? I had to look it up. And
go for it. Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
He's the CEO of Brave Software, and what Brave Software does is makes a web browser. I think like 4 people use that web browser today, but that's what Brave Software is doing, is it's making its own web browser.
Full circle. Yeah, and we've come full circle. Now we're wrapping it up. Check out our blog post on our blog, gunnertech.com, podcasts on iTunes. Keep an eye out for the JavaScript ebook, which will be coming out early next year on Amazon, iBooks, anywhere else you can buy an ebook. And tune in next week, Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And we promise we'll be on time and everything will work. And our computers will be so charged.
First time, 100%.
First try. All right. Thanks a lot, Cody.
Yep.
All right. We'll catch you guys next week. Take care.